insignia of his, that blood dot they all wear on their backs. Well, I've got one of my own.
The Flash movie is finally here and getting closer after a lot of years in production and a lot of production problems and a lot of post-production problems. But I'm not here to talk about that Flash, I'm here to talk about the 1990s Flash TV show. So as always, I'm Al, this is the Geek in Review, and this is the first in a series of videos I'm going to do leading up to the Flash film, just covering all the sort of different versions of the Flash, comic books, TV, movies, that sort of thing. So if you want to make sure you don't miss anything, please subscribe to the channel if you've not done it already, and leave a like on the video, and I'll ask again at the end. So if you've never seen the 90s Flash TV show, I can understand why, because I didn't even know it was a TV show till the mid-noughties. I seen the first episode when I was very young and I rented it out in a video shop, and I thought that was a Flash movie. I didn't know there was a TV show till I was in America in the mid-noughties, and I think I seen it on DVD or I seen it somewhere and I was like, it was an entire TV show. I kind of get fond memories of the first episode, and watching it back, it's pretty solid, I've got to be honest. Oh, and by the way, if you do want to watch the TV show, it's all for free on YouTube. Just type in 90s Flash and you'll find it no problem at all. And leave a like on that video, and leave a like on this video as well. But yeah, for a 90s TV show, like, this is pretty good. Like, you know, if you've seen Smallville and you watch, like, the Arrowverse or, you know, the current version of the Flash show, you can see where Smallville sort of started and those shows carried over. But you can kind of see it with this as well, because it is very 90s. I mean, obviously the fashion and all that, the portrayal of the characters, there's, you know, the sort of popular brother, Barry's the unpopular brother. Everything's kind of nudge, nudge, wink, wink, a little bit sexy. The characters are pretty good. The stories are pretty good. Like I say, it is bare bones by today's standards, but it's not terrible. It is very different in the sort of setup for Barry. His mum and dad are alive in this. Let's say he's got an older brother called Jay. And if you're a Flash comic book fan or a Flash TV show fan, you know that Jay Garrick was the first Flash, so that's probably a nod to that, but I couldn't find anything that really said that it was or wasn't. It's just very odd that his brother would have the same name as another Flash. And it's also sort of built on the back of what Tim Burton had done a few years ago with his Batman. I mean, if you look at the Flash suit, it's got that super muscly thing sort of look. I mean, if you told me it was designed by the same person that had worked on the Tim Burton's Batsuit, I'd believe you. And, you know, let's be honest, it does look a little bit heavy on the old fabric, but at the time, this looked solid. It looked absolutely great. And John Wesley Ship didn't need the fake muscles, because if you look at the guy, he is ripped. And this was the era of, you know, your Stallones and your Schwarzeneggers. But he wasn't an action guy. It looks as if this version of Barry was just a quarterback, but, you know, a geek kind of thing. And yeah, that's crazy when you think about how ripped this guy is for the time. And the intro music as well, and the way that Central City is portrayed, is very Burton-esque to the Batman films. So, let's just get into what happened then. So there's no real sort of setup for this, it's just straight into the bad bikers 90s trope showing up, which, let's be honest, the bad bikers thing is still going on today. And then we get a pretty basic setup with the Allan family. Like I say, the backstory's different. His mum and dad are still alive. He's got a brother who is pretty clearly the favourite. I mean, yeah, it is the brother's birthday. Barry is still doing the crime lab thing, but his brother's a cop, his dad was a cop, so guess who the favourite is? And oh yeah, Iris West is there as well, but she's basically not in this episode or features at all, so don't think about it too much. But this Barry is very different to the Grant Gustin and the Ezra Miller Flash. He's older, more confident, a bit less of a nerd, more of a jock type. Yeah, as I said, he's got some issues with his dad and brother, but apart from that, the rest of this, or the lot of this episode, feels beat by beat to stuff that you've seen before. Or at least stuff that you've seen now. So, the origin of his powers is pretty much the same. He's involved in an accident in the lab. And then, this is the bit where it's a little bit different because we've not seen it in the Ezra stuff, and it was covered a little bit differently in CW, is he starts to learn about his powers on his own and develops them without any help from Star Labs or anyone else. And it's not until he starts to realise that something bigger's going on that he gets referred to Star Labs. And I like that there's a mention that there was an accident at Star Labs where someone died, because, you know what that means in the CW show. Anyway. So the powers themselves, it's the 90s, it doesn't look great. They're hardly exactly Matrix bullet time, put it that way. And the powers are sort of played for laughs as well. Like, there's a scene where he tries to tidy his apartment and he does it, but then he creates a whirlwind and just makes it worse. But one thing that's great about this episode, despite how aged bits of it may be, or how cheesy bits of it may be, is it builds on things. It sets things up brilliantly. Because every time that Barry uses his powers that he can't control at the moment, he just sort of passes out, and I'll get back to that later on. But once he does go to Star Labs, this is where it feels a lot more like the Flash TV show we're familiar with in the modern day. We meet Christina McGee, who's an original idea for the show. She's not based on any comic book character, at least as far as I'm aware. And it turns out that she also invented wireless monitors about 20 years before we had them, because look at this technology. But yeah, I love Amanda Pays in this role, and I'm glad that they carried her over into the CW verse a couple of times, at least mentioned and shown up as well. But one thing that I do like that's very different to the Barry, in fact any other Barry that we've seen in live action, is this version doesn't want his powers. He doesn't really want to be the Flash or a superhero, and he doesn't really want Iris West. So I like that there's a big core change here, but it being the 90s, it's not going to get the deep character exploration that it needs, and also the TV show was cancelled after one season for being too expensive. So, I admire what they done. Not everyone's going to like it, but whatever. And speaking of the 90s, the villains have a glorious lair. I miss villain lairs. It's all empty warehouses now. They don't do the whole caves, mountains, volcanoes thing, and I wish they did. It was a fantastic trope. Come on, Fast and the Furious, if anyone can bring it back, you can. Which does make the show feel a little bit aged, but again, Sons of Anarchy done, 7 seasons on the bad biker, bad guy vibe. And rewatching this as an adult, they don't get much screen time as well, because this is very focused on Barry, but not too much. I mean, they give Barry an arc here when his brother Jay is put in charge of finding these rebel bikers. And it turns out that Pike, the leader, is an ex-cop and Jay's ex-partner, and Jay gave him the scars, but beyond that, we don't get any other details, and that bugs me. I want to know how he fucked this guy up. So the bikers decide to set up an ambush for the cops so you can see where this is going. And I like that when this happened, Barry isn't the Flash yet. He's not the hero. He's still trying to master his powers. He's sort of got the suit, but they found out his weakness, which is, well, his weakness is every time that he sort of overexerts himself, he's totally knackered, which is why he keeps passing out. And of course, his brother dies in the ambush, and one thing that I like about this is, yeah, it is the standard hero arc, but Barry, who's going to be the Flash, isn't quick enough to save his brother. So, irony in there, but it was the 90s, whatever. So yeah, we've got hero arc, vengeance, all that stuff, and of course he gets the full superhero suit with the own symbol, because the biker gang of theirs, and he needs to be recognised, and we need to sell merchandise. So the intro to him as his first time out as the Flash is kind of perfect if you look by the 90ness of it all. I like that we don't really see him, he's just messing with people. Again, the powers are getting played for a little bit of comedy here when he first goes out. And yeah, I'm sure it is to save the effects budget for later on in the episode, but just using the sort of whizzing sounds and the close-up shots led to a pretty good reveal for the entire suit. And I like that he beats them up, but he still gets injured as well, so it's shown that he's not too overpowered and he's not in full control of his abilities yet. But let's talk about the suit. I think it looks great. It might just be like the whole James Bond thing, that the one you grew up with is your favourite. Yes, it does look very for want of a better word, heavy on the fabric. But I really like it. I mean, there's been a ton of Flash suits the last 10 years. I don't like the plasticky Ezra Miller version, but this one feels very real to me, you know? But yeah, he's not too overpowered when we meet him for the first time as the Flash. But when he is out and about, it does feel like the start of the Burton Batman film to me, where the police sort of start to perpetuate his own image, and yeah, not a massive fan of that. Because this version of Central City, it doesn't say what the year is, and some things kind of look a bit oldie-fashioned and some things look a bit futuristic. For example, he uses 90s computer science to locate the biker gang. They never explain any of this or how it works, because they didn't know how computers were going to work or how anything was going to work in the future. So it's just, turn the computer on, hit a couple of keys, we'll get an answer, sorted. It was simpler times, people, simpler times. But the big showdown itself, rewatching this felt a little bit anticlimactic. I don't know how it feels for you if you've watched this for the first time as an adult, but as a kid, I absolutely loved this, and rewatching it, it didn't really work for me because there's one thing about this show that it treads a weird line that shows don't anymore, that it's kind of very sexy, but there's no real sex in it. There's a lot of violence, but not really, because all the grenades that the bikers use aren't grenades, they're just like, you know, whatever. And I like that shows now are more defined, but yeah, rewatching this in 2023, where would they have went with this? Was this going to be a much darker Barry if they kept it going? But yeah, considering the next sort of successful superhero show that we got after this was Smallville about 10 years later, that definitely treaded the more kiddie 6 p.m. that you can watch with your kids kind of vibe. Whereas this show, I don't know, I don't know if a kid these days would watch this and be interested in it, because everything is so dark. And I don't just mean like the plot and the violence or whatever, I just mean like the lighting, the look of the show. I don't know if this would appeal to kids these days, because when you look at the modern versions of The Flash, whether it's in the TV show, movie, or the comics, or the animated stuff, or whatever, it's all bright and vibrant, and that's the kind of one thing that they didn't latch on to that they should have done. Yeah, you can do the Tim Burton Batman world, but you can still make the Flash stand out in that world, and with the suit, the lighting, the way that it's shot, and the Flash powers, the Flash doesn't stand out when he's sort of in action and doing his thing. You're more paying attention, or at least certainly I was more focused on how are they going to do the powers, how's it going to work, is it going to be CGI in this? I was maybe thinking ahead of myself a little bit too much. I suppose I better get back to talking about the end of this episode. So of course, Barry defeats the bad guy, but he has a shaky moment because of weakness, and I like that they bring it back, because again, this show builds on everything. We get a great introduction to the characters, well, not great, but it works for the time. We get a setup, we get a build-up of Barry getting his powers, you'd learn to use them stage by stage, asking for help, we get the hero arc, we get the suit, we get all that. So for the time, this episode is pretty solid, and by the end of the first episode, the Flash is born, for the first time in live action. So while this does feel very one-dimensional by today's standards, there are a lot of beats and a lot of things in here that have been carried over into other versions of The Flash and other shows. Smallville gets credited for sort of creating that whole template for the CW thing for Green Arrow and The Flash and, you know, whatever. But I think that this show laid a really solid foundation for what was to come, and maybe, I wouldn't say it was ahead of its time in terms of being visionary, but it was ahead of its time in how it was handling certain story beats and production beats for a comic book hero on the small screen in the 90s. Because the show is very 90s, I mean, look at the fashion, the clothes are hanging off pretty much every guy. But John Wesley Ship is Barry / The Flash. I love him. This was the Flash for me, and still kind of is. I mean, when he pops up in the CW show, I mean, like, when I think of the Flash, this is the first person that pops into my head. But although bits of this haven't aged well, I think this is an absolutely solid show, and as I mentioned, if you want to watch it for free, you can do so on YouTube. I'll leave a link in the description below. So it's not just the first episode that's up, it's the entire first season you can watch for free on YouTube. And while it's not amazing, it's a good time killer. Like I say, if you're a sort of superhero fan and you've not seen it and you've watched sort of current Arrowverse or you've watched Smallville, I definitely recommend checking out a few episodes. There's a few surprise actors and performances in there, but I'm not going to ruin that. But if you have seen this episode or you've watched it after watching this video, let me know what you think in the comments below. Did you like it? Did you hate it? All that stuff. Or you can reach out to me on Twitter at TheGeeksReviews. Now, I'm going to be doing more videos on The Flash leading up to, well, The Flash. I'm also going to be covering some Batman and Superman stuff as well, because this movie is going to be a huge movie that ties into a lot, or well, all of the DCU stuff. So if you don't want to miss that, make sure you subscribe to the channel, and if you've already done that, leave a like on the video. And as always, I'm Al. Thanks for watching.